Welcome to the sound that never stopped ringing. A sound that drifts through the pine forest of South Georgia, where a town once stood and then vanished. It begins with a hum, faint low trembling through the needles. Not wind, not thunder, something older. And then a bell, just one, ringing somewhere deep in the trees. They say it still rings after rain when the ground exhales steam and the air smells of ash. They call it the bell of New Canaan. Though there is no church left here, no steeple, no rope, no hands to pull it. This is what remains of a community erased. The year was 1879. The map said Georgia. But no map shows this place anymore. Only fragments, a half-burned letter, a carpenter's ledger, an obituary without cause. Elias Ransom. That's the name the archives give us. Colored carpenter, age 37, formerly of Beaufort, South Carolina. Missing, presumed dead. No known family, no descendants, no grave. But the forest remembers. They say he came here with 20 freed families, veterans of the war, men who'd built the South and were told to leave it. They brought hammers, planks, prayer books. They cleared the land, built cabins from pine and clay, raised a chapel with open rafters. A schoolhouse stood near the creek. Children wrote their names on rough plank desks. They called the settlement New Canaan. The promised land, they said, and for a time it was. Until the surveyors came. Until the railroad line crept closer. Until someone looked at the soil and said, this ground could turn a profit. Soon the name New Canaan began to vanish from land registries, from mail routes, from memory. Then came the fire. Some said it was a lantern. Some said it was lightning. Others whispered it was deliberate. But no report was ever filed. No newspaper mentioned it, just silence. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing. No graves, no bodies, only a ring of ash. And the bell. If you stand here now under these trees, you can still smell the resin, the smoke, the faint sweetness of burned pine. And when the wind moves east, you can still hear something. Beneath the needles, the ground feels soft, as if it remembers what was buried here. We found a page in a Freedmen's Bureau record dated June 4th, 1879. It reads, community self-built, 19 households, land held in common, no violence reported. 3 months later, another entry. Blank. No signatures. Just a pencil mark fading into the page. Some call it clerical loss. Others call it the night the pines took them. And somewhere between those two explanations lies the truth. You can drive through this part of Georgia and never know you've crossed over it. There's no sign, no plaque. Just a line of trees, too straight, too deliberate, rising where streets once were. But if you pull over, if you walk 50 steps into the woods, you'll find what's left. A foundation stone blackened by fire. A hinge rusted into the soil. A child's thimble caught in a knot of roots. Listen long enough, and the forest breathes slow, rhythmic, like something still alive beneath the surface. Was it arson? A land grab? A curse the ledgers never say? The newspapers never cared. But in one church archive, 2 counties over, we found a line in an old baptismal book. Elias Ransom Carpenter baptized in the river before dawn. Said the water felt cold as iron. After that, nothing. By 1882, the forest had reclaimed it all. Cabins, fences, the chapel swallowed by green. Farmers avoided the ridge. Children dared each other to enter, to touch the stones, to count the echoes. Each time, someone said they heard it. That same bell, ringing through the mist. Maybe it's the wind. Maybe it's resin cracking in the old trunks. But it sounds heavier, older, like memory refusing to fade. Tonight, we follow that sound. We follow it into the forest where New Canaan once stood. We follow it to the man they forgot, Elias Ransom, builder, soldier, believer. Because what was buried beneath these pines was never truly gone. Before we begin, leave a comment wherever you're watching from. Tell us what the air sounds like where you are. and whether you've ever heard something calling from beneath the trees. This is not just a story, it's a record that breathes. And tonight, we open the first page. The air is thick here, not just with heat, but with history. Georgia, 1879. The year Reconstruction began to break apart, the year maps were redrawn, and promises began to vanish like mist after sunrise. Down these pine corridors, you can still hear it. The faint hum of cicadas, the slow creak of trees in wind, the hollow echo of something that was once alive. This land, St. James County, was never meant to be seen again. The soil is dark rich with sap and smoke. Each pine stands like a column, tall, patient, almost reverent. If you look closely, their roots twist through the ruins of what used to be walls, and the forest floor breathes through the cracks of old foundations. Back then, there were no roads here, only wagon paths carved by soldiers returning from a war that promised freedom and delivered debt. Elias Ransom was one of them. A carpenter, a man of quiet belief. He had fought with the 21st U.S. Colored Infantry, saw Petersburg Appomattox and the silence that came after. When the army disbanded, he carried with him a set of tools wrapped in oiled cloth, and the idea that freedom needed a place to live. He wasn't alone. 24 families followed him from the coast. Freedmen, veterans, widows, children, carrying the last of their belongings in burlap sacks. They had been promised 40 acres and a mule. Instead, they found swamp and timber and each other. It was early spring when they stopped in a clearing between two creeks where the ground was high and the air smelled clean. They built shelters first, then cabins, then a small chapel from pine and clay. The chapel bell was cast from scrap iron salvaged from an old field plow. It was heavy, uneven, but when it rang, it carried through the trees for miles. They called it New Canaan. At night, the light from their fires flickered between the trunks, soft and golden, like stars trapped in the forest. They sang hymns in broken harmony voices, lifted from pain, stitched together by faith. Steal away to Jesus, they sang. There's rest for the weary. And for a while there was. The Reconstruction agents called it a colored settlement. A minor success story, self-built, self-sustained. They came once every few months, wrote notes in ledgers, nodded with polite approval, then rode away. But outside these woods, the world was changing. By 1878, the railroad had reached within 30 miles. Investors in Atlanta were buying land cheap, fast, often without signatures. The papers called it progress. For the freedmen of New Canaan, it sounded like thunder. Elias wrote letters, at least the archives say he did. 2 of them survive. One to a Freedmen's Bureau officer in Savannah: "We wish to hold this ground as our own to build in peace. We ask only to be left in quiet." And another, unsigned, undated, written in charcoal on paper torn from a Bible margin: "If they come for the trees, they come for us." The handwriting trembles, but the message is steady. The locals, white farmers from the neighboring counties, saw the settlement as a curiosity at first. Colored folk living in the woods, one newspaper line read. Then, as timber prices rose, curiosity turned to envy, and envy to something darker. One report from 1879 mentions a dispute over fence lines. Another, an accident involving oil lamps. The details stop there. By late summer, the creeks ran low and the air hung thick with heat. Mosquitoes swarmed dust, clung to sweat. Still, the people of New Canaan worked, cutting timber, raising corn, singing as they built. Children played near the creek, women drew water in wooden buckets that creaked when they lifted them. Each sound hammer hymn, heartbeat folded into the rhythm of survival. But something else was stirring a silence too deep for comfort. Travelers stopped passing through. Mail stopped arriving. The local storekeeper in Pine Bluff told one visitor, "No one's been down that way in weeks." The last letter mentioning New Canaan came from a missionary named Rebecca Stokes, dated July 21, 1879. She wrote, "They spoke of a light that moves between the cabins after midnight, like someone carrying a lantern, though no one is awake." A few days later, the missionary left the area. No one ever saw her again. When the Bureau sent a clerk to check the settlement that September, he returned empty-handed. His report is one line: arrived to find forest only. No structures, no inhabitants. No structures, no inhabitants, just forest. And yet this land does not feel empty. When you stand here at dusk, the pines seem to shift their trunks, bending with the wind, their shadows stretching like hands. The light changes fast, gold to amber, amber to gray. The air hums with a low vibration, not sound exactly, more like memory vibrating in wood. Somewhere beneath your feet lies the old chapel bell buried. Maybe melted, maybe waiting. The soil still glints with flecks of iron where it might have fallen. Touch the ground, and it's warm even in winter. People say the roots drink from old ashes, and that's why the pines grow so tall here. The story of New Canaan doesn't survive in books, it lingers in whispers. Truck drivers who pass the ridge at night claim they see light moving through the trees. Hunters say they hear a hammer tapping in the distance. A few who dared to step inside the clearing spoke of footprints appearing in the sand, then vanishing again. But history has no space for whispers. In the official narrative, New Canaan never existed. Its people never built, never burned, never sang. It's as if they were swallowed whole by silence, by soil, by time. Still, when the wind blows through these pines, you can almost hear them again. The children's laughter, the creak of saws, the rhythm of prayer rising like smoke. You can almost see Elias Ransom in the doorway of his cabin, sleeves rolled up, face half in shadow, watching the horizon for a train that never came. This was Georgia, 1879. A place between reconstruction and oblivion, between memory and myth. And for a brief moment under these trees, freedom had a home. The first record comes from a ledger. Freedmen's Bureau District Office of Savannah, dated March 1879. A neat hand-blue ink, almost elegant. Elias Ransom, age 37. Occupation carpenter. Reported to have settled with freed families along the St. James Creek. Cooperative colony, self-sustained. No aid requested. That's all. No more than 20 words. But inside those lines, an entire world breathes. The Bureau was already thinning. Then federal oversight retreating funds cut agents recalled. In 1879, the idea of freedom still looked good on paper, but in practice, it was already bleeding at the edges. The federal officers called men like Elias model citizens. Local sheriffs called them trouble. There's another line in the same book 3 pages later, written in pencil faint. Ransom settlement, no further contact. Mail undelivered. Then, nothing. The handwriting changes after that new clerk, new ink, new month. The paper smells of mold now, brittle to the touch. But under the lamplight, you can still see the indentations of the pen, as if someone pressed too hard or hesitated. And that's where the official story ends. But beyond the record, something else survived. In 1938, during the WPA Slave Narrative Project, an elderly woman in Augusta named Sarah Jane Miller told a story that made the interviewer pause his typewriter. She said, "When I was a girl, they talked about a place in the woods. All them free folks gone missing. They say them pines still cry when the night fall. My granddaddy tell me, don't go near them trees after sundown. The wind ain't wind there, it's breath." The interviewer underlined the word breath. He wrote in the margin. Possibly reference to New Canaan. Sarah Jane didn't know the name. But she remembered the sound the bell, she said, ringing like somebody warning folks. Then the whole forest starts singing back. Her voice trembled when she told it. He asked if it was just a story. She said, "No, sir. Story don't make the trees lean like that." And then there's the newspaper. The Macon Weekly Telegraph, August 1879. Buried on page 4 between train schedules and advertisements for patent medicine. Fire suspected in timber tract near St. James County. Colored settlement unconfirmed. No casualties reported. No name, no photographs, no follow-up. It's the only line in print that acknowledges the event, a single sentence that swallowed a town. The folklore spreads like roots, twisting under fences across generations. Locals called the area the Hollow of the Bell. Children were warned, don't follow the sound, it leads you out but never back. Some versions say Elias Ransom was seen walking through the trees long after the fire coat torn, carrying a hammer. He wasn't alive, they said, just working still, fixing something no one could see. One story says a hunter found footprints that glowed faintly at night, shaped like bare feet pressed into ash. When he bent down to touch them, they vanished, leaving the smell of burned wood. He never went back. Another tale from a preacher named Reverend Booker T. Haynes told in a sermon in 1903. The Lord sent them to build a house of faith. The devil sent smoke to test it. But when the fire came, them righteous folks ain't perish. They walk right into glory. And the pines? They sing for them still. The congregation said amen, but half the town crossed themselves when they left the church. In the county archives, there's one more trace, a property map drawn by a railroad surveyor. It shows the St. James Creek, a ridgeline, and a square marked vacant timberland, no claimant. But if you hold it up to light, you can see faint pencil markings beneath the ink-erased names. Ransom, Dunlap, Fields, Grace, all gone from the final copy. Someone somewhere erased them deliberately. For years, the land lay empty. By 1885, lumber companies had moved in. They cut down the younger pines, built a sawmill near the river. Workers said the wood from that tract wouldn't burn right, it hissed. Smoked, smelled like tar. Some loads were rejected altogether. One foreman wrote in his ledger, the trees bleed black. Locals refused to camp there. They said strange lights drifted between the trunks after midnight, white at first, then red. The lumberjacks called it ghost fire. The company men called it nonsense. But one night in 1886, a worker named Henry Cobb went missing. His lantern was found still burning, hanging from a branch 20 feet above the ground. The chain holding it was cold to the touch. The next day, the foreman quit. He told the company he heard a bell ringing under the soil. When asked if he'd been drinking, he said, it weren't that kind of sound. The fact, the folklore, they begin to blur. Each feeds the other, each fills the silence the records left behind. It's said that on clear mornings when the sun hits the pine needles just right, you can see faint impressions in the bark, like letters burned into the wood. Some say they spell New Canaan. Others swear they form the names of those who built it. A geologist who visited in the 1960s noted that the soil here carries an unusual iron content, as if something metallic once melted and sank deep underground. When he dug samples, he found fragments of glass, warped, bubbled, fused with clay. He thought it was lamp glass. The locals said it was from the chapel bell. The fire folded it, they whispered, and now it sleeps. Folklore insists Elias Ransom didn't die in the fire. He walked through it. They say he appeared months later at the edge of the St. James Bridge, clothes still smelling of smoke. He told a woman selling peaches by the road, the town ain't gone, it's waiting. Then he vanished into the woods again. Others believe the bell kept ringing for 3 days after the fire. No one pulling it, no wind strong enough to move it. Just a deep tone that rose at dawn and fell by dusk until it stopped suddenly mid-chime. The WPA interviewer who spoke with Sarah Jane in 1938 returned to St. James County that same year. He brought a recorder, one of those heavy aluminum cylinders. He never found the clearing. He did, however, record the sound of wind in the pines. When the tape was played back, there was a second sound underneath. Rhythmic, faint, metallic. Like iron striking iron. The archivists labeled it mechanical noise disregard. But when you listen, really listen, it sounds like a hammer. One strike every few seconds. Steady, deliberate, endless. There's one final thread from a diary kept by a schoolteacher named Lucinda Holcomb who passed through the region in 1880. Her entry reads, They speak of a carpenter who built a church of pine, and when it burned he stood among the ashes and said, "If they take the house, the word will stay." He turned and walked into the forest. The people followed. None returned. Her handwriting shakes on that last line, as if the pen itself wanted to stop. Fact says the settlement vanished. Folklore says it was taken. And between those two versions, the land keeps its silence. If you come here now, in late summer, when the heat bends the air and the insects fade into a hum, the forest seems almost alive, listening. Pine cones drop like small heartbeats. Sap glistens on bark like sweat. And through it all, a rhythm you can't name pulse breath, maybe memory. The first record is paper. The last is wind. Both speak the same truth. New Canaan was real. And something someone made sure we'd never stop wondering how it disappeared. The last week in New Canaan began like any other. Slow mornings. Thin smoke curling from chimneys. The smell of wet pine and ash in the air. Children carried buckets to the creek. Women beat laundry against flat stones. Men worked in the fields, their hammers echoing through the trees like steady heartbeats. Elias Ransom rose before sunrise, always the same rhythm. Coffee boiled, black prayers whispered low, one hand resting on the carpenter's square he carried everywhere. He was building a new frame for the chapel, taller this time. He said so, the sound can rise to heaven. The bell had cracked a month before, but he refused to melt it down. He patched it with wire, said it would ring again. The others laughed, softly shook their heads. But when he said it, they believed him. Each morning the light came through the forest like scripture, broken, bright, almost holy. But that week, the light changed. It flickered sharp, uneven, as if the air itself had learned to shiver. The creek ran low, insects vanished, even the birds fell quiet. The world held its breath, and then came the strangers. 2 men on horseback, dust thick on their coats. They said they were from the county office surveyors for the railroad extension. Their boots left deep prints in the wet soil. They asked questions no one wanted to answer. Who owned what? Who signed which paper? How far the land reached? Elias met them at the chapel door, his hammer still in hand. He spoke politely, but his voice carried steel. He told them this land was freehold, earned with our backs and blessed with our sweat. They nodded, smiled, rode away. The next day another rider came alone. Pale horse, no papers. He didn't stop, just passed through the clearing, looking, counting. That night the wind shifted. The smell of smoke, not theirs, drifted through the trees. Elias stood outside his cabin, head tilted, listening. He told his wife, "That ain't our fire." No one slept. By dawn, the forest felt wrong, heavy, close like a hand pressed against the lungs. The children were kept inside doors, barred, lanterns dimmed. Some of the men wanted to leave, take the families north toward the main road. Elias said no. He said, "The Lord don't tell a man to build a town, just to run from it." So they stayed. They prayed through the morning, each family gathered in the chapel, voices trembling, air thick with candle smoke. A woman named Ruth Fields sang the old hymn, "Guide me, O thou great Jehovah." Her voice cracked on the final note, and then the bell rang. 3 times. No one touched it. No rope moved. The sound rolled through the trees, low, deep, like thunder trapped under the earth. Men froze. Children covered their ears. Someone shouted it was just wind. But the wind was still. When the echoes died, a hush settled so complete that even the leaves seemed afraid to move. That afternoon, a storm built on the horizon. Black clouds rising behind the ridge, heavy with light that never struck. The air tasted metallic like iron and rain. Men began boarding windows, tying animals, soaking rags to keep the sparks down. Elias stood by the chapel steps, eyes lifted toward the sky. He whispered something no one heard, a prayer maybe, or a promise. Then came the glow. Faint orange crawling between the trunks, fire. Someone screamed. Children ran. The flames moved too fast, not like wood burning, but like wind catching breath. The bell rang again, one long note, and split in two. The sound tore the night open. People tried to gather water, but the well had gone dry. The creek hissed steam. Elias ran toward the chapel, hammer in hand, shouting for the others to follow. They say he made it to the doorway, turned once toward the cabins, then vanished in the smoke. The storm never broke. Only light flashing behind the clouds and the sound of fire breathing through the forest. Witnesses from Pine Bluff said the sky glowed red for hours. They thought it was the sunset until the smoke reached their fields. When they came 2 days later, they found nothing but scorched ground and twisted iron. The chapel bell had melted into a dark shape half buried in clay. The cabins were gone. No bodies, no prints, only ash and silence. But some say that wasn't the end. A woman named Mary Dunlap, one of the families who'd left New Canaan a week before the fire, told the Bureau in 1880, "We heard it, the bells still ringin'. Every night, same hour. Then one night it stopped. I think they done gone all together like a choir finishing the song." Another man, a trapper from the next county, claimed he saw figures moving through the smoke that morning. He said they were walking, not running, single file, heads bowed, each carrying something in their hands. He called out. No one answered. When he got closer, there was nothing but mist. He never trapped again. The railroad never built through St. James County. The investors pulled out. Too costly, they said. Too unstable. Locals knew better. For years afterward, travelers who crossed the ridge after dark reported hearing the hammer again, 3 strikes, then a pause. Sometimes it came from the creek, sometimes from the trees. Always the same rhythm. 3, pause, 1. When the WPA team visited in the 1930s, they asked old residents what the sound meant. A man named Isaiah Green said, "That's Elias workin'. You can't burn a builder's hands, he's still fixin' what broke." He smiled when he said it, but his eyes never left the forest line. Even now, standing here, the ground seems to breathe. Soft pine needles shifting underfoot. Air heavy, almost human. The scent of resin and rust mixed with rain. Each tree a witness, each gust a memory. When you close your eyes, you can almost see them again. Ransom with his hammer. Ruth with her hymn. The children clinging to their mother's skirts. The bells swinging in an empty tower. It's all still here, folded into the soil, not lost, just buried. And somewhere beneath these roots, the last light of New Canaan still burns quiet, patient, waiting. The first official report after the fire comes almost 2 years too late. Freedman's Bureau, Savannah Division, March 1881. A single paragraph buried under 3 pages of crop yields and payment arrears. St. James County inquiry received regarding colored settlement, previously marked as New Canaan. No occupants found. Land now recorded as State Timber Reserve. Prior claim void. That's all. No mention of fire. No witness names. No bodies. Just a bureaucratic line, prior claim void. When the federal presence faded, the paper trail followed. By 1883, the Bureau offices closed. The ledgers went to warehouses. And whatever truth still flickered beneath those pine trees fell silent again. But the church records, they whisper. In a small wooden archive in Liberty County, beneath dust and mildew, lies a book labeled Baptisms and Burials, 1877 to 1884. The ink has browned pages stiff as bark, and on page 216, faint, crooked, half smeared by a water stain, a line appears. For those lost in the fire at New Canaan, Lord, keep their names in light. No signatures, no list of the dead. Only a prayer written by someone who couldn't bear to name them aloud. The same handwriting appears again, 6 pages later, under notes from the field. Visited the ridge. The ground still warm. Found iron fused in shape of bell. Iron fused in shape of bell, not remnant, not fragment, shape. The writer was Reverend Amos Harlan, a circuit preacher known for visiting freed settlements after the war. His letters are still preserved in microfilm, barely legible. He describes traveling through St. James in the autumn of 1880. The forest smelled of tar and rain. I found no living soul, but I felt watched. I heard hammering soft like heartbeat under the earth. I prayed aloud, and the sound stopped. He left the county that same month. His journal ends abruptly. The last sentence, the air hums like a hymn with no words. And then there's the folklore still growing like moss between the roots. In the 1920s, a folklorist from Tuskegee University named Clara Dupree collected oral histories across rural Georgia. One interview never published references the town that burned but kept singing. The informant, a farmer named James Tillman, told her, "When I was a boy, we'd come round that ridge, see lights moving like candles in the trees. Mama say, don't look too long, them folks still praying." I ask her who. She say, the ones who walked into the smoke. The ones who walked into the smoke. The phrase repeats across counties, decades, generations, as if each retelling tries to explain what the records refuse to name. One local paper, the Savannah Morning News, June 1897, published a short column in its Oddities of the South section. Residents near St. James report a phenomenon following rainfall, a hum beneath the ground as if from distant machinery. The area once known for its colored colony, New Canaan, remains uninhabited. A hum beneath the ground, distant machinery. Today, scientists might call it micro-seismic vibration pressure pockets, shifting roots. But locals, they called it the sound of work continuing. They said Elias Ransom and his people never left. They just moved below. One WPA audio record logged at dawn 1939 contains an interview with Isaiah Green, then 86 years old. The interviewer asks about New Canaan. Isaiah laughs a dry, papery sound and says, "They ain't gone. I hear 'em when I cut wood. Sound like somebody sawing slow. Some say it's roots poppin'. I say it's folks fixin' what broke." He pauses, then almost whispering, "I seen the man too, the one with the hammer. He ain't never raise his eyes, just swing and breathe, swing and breathe." The interviewer asks if he's sure. Isaiah replies, "Ain't nothing surer than sound." Folklore drifts like ash, impossible to pin down. By the 1940s, the story shifts again. Now it's said that the fire wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to cleanse. That Elias Ransom himself set it believing he could burn away evil and build something purer in its ashes. That he walked into the flames, singing "Steal Away" until his voice melted into wind. Another version, darker, still says the railroad men brought oil, not water. That they came at night under orders to clear the ridge. And when the blaze began, they swore they saw shapes standing in the fire hands, lifted faces calm as if they'd been waiting. No one agrees on which is true, but all versions end the same with silence and the bell. In 1964, an amateur historian named Dr. Leonard Brown rediscovered the site by accident while mapping post-war settlements. His field notes read like ghost stories, disguised as geography. He writes, "The forest is unusually symmetrical, as though replanted by hand. Each tree grows at equal distance, forming what seems a deliberate pattern. Soil samples reveal high iron concentration. Compass readings erratic." He continues, "At sunset, a low vibration resonates underfoot. Possibly groundwater flow, but cadence resembles human rhythm: 5 beats, pause, repeat." He camped one night alone. At 3:17 a.m., he noted, heard bell-tone single strike sustained for 10 seconds. Air temperature dropped sharply. Felt presence behind me. No animal stirring. When he returned to Atlanta, Brown told colleagues he'd found the outline of old foundations, maybe the chapel. He planned a second visit. He never went. His notes end with a final line scrawled across the page. "Some places are not to be studied. They remember you back." The county changed after that. Highways cut through parts of the old forest, but not the ridge. Every attempt to log or farm that area failed. Equipment broke. Workers quit. They said engines stalled when they reached the boundary. A local pastor, Reverend Wallace Greer, wrote in 1972, "The pine grove resists. Tools dull there. The soil rejects shovels. You can clear the ground, but by morning the needles return neat, even like they were laid by hand." His church bell was later stolen, or so he thought. 2 weeks later, hikers reported hearing a bell deep in the woods. Identical tone. They said it sounded old. By the 1980s, the legend of New Canaan had become a cautionary tale, a ghost story whispered at campfires, stripped of its roots. But the descendants of those early freed families, the ones who fled before the fire, kept a quieter tradition. Each year, on the first Sunday of June, they gather by the creek near Pine Bluff. They place a wooden plank in the water, carved with names their grandparents remembered. When the current takes it, they say, they still buildin'. Some bring hammers, others bells. They strike once, twice, 3 times, then let the sound fade into the trees. It isn't ceremony, it's remembrance, work continuing. But perhaps the strangest record appears not in archives or folklore at all, but in sound. In 1998, a field recording from a nature documentary accidentally captured low-frequency vibrations near St. James Ridge. Spectrograph analysis later revealed a harmonic pattern, 5 beats, pause, repeat, identical to Dr. Brown's 1964 notes. When amplified, the sound resembles metal striking wood, distant rhythmic human. Acoustic engineers called it environmental coincidence. But listeners, especially those from the nearby counties, called it something else. They called it Elias's work. And every time the recording is played, something curious happens. Birds fall silent. For a few seconds, the forest on the tape seems to inhale. Then, release. It's here that fact surrenders, and folklore takes over completely. Some say New Canaan never burned, that it slipped through time, folded between the roots. That the forest is its cathedral, now living, breathing, remembering. Others believe the fire was judgment, a divine test the people transformed into keepers of the forest. Their souls built the trees, one elder said. That's why they whisper. Still others, mostly descendants, believe it was resistance. That Elias led his people into the smoke on purpose to deny those who came to claim their land. He told them they can't take what's already fire. And so they walked, singing, until the night took them all. Whatever the truth, something remains, a pattern, a hum, a persistence, and a question that keeps returning. Why does this land still sound alive? Perhaps the answer is simple. History burns the body. Folklore keeps the breath. Each document a trace of ink. Each whisper a pulse that refuses to fade. Maybe that's what Elias Ransom built all along. Not a chapel of wood, but a memory of endurance, a structure you can't erase with flame or time. And so beneath the Georgia pines, the hammer keeps striking, steady, slow, unseen. Fact, folklore, one heartbeat. Still building, it begins again, with sound. Not a legend now, but a recording. In 2003, a group of graduate students from Emory University visited the Pine Ridge with a geophone, a device that listens to the ground. They weren't hunting ghosts. They were studying soil acoustics. But what they found changed the way the map reads this place. The instrument picked up a pulse rhythmic metallic deep under the earth. 5 beats, pause, repeat. Just like before. They thought it was machinery, old mining residue maybe. But there are no mines here. No tunnels. No reason for the ground to breathe like that. When they increased the sensitivity, another layer appeared faint. Harmonics higher than the human ear should hear. One of the students, a cellist named Rachel Ng, called it music that builds itself. She said it sounded like hammer on wood echoing through distance, like someone still working down there. They sent the data to the State Geological Office. The reply was brief. No anomaly detected, possibly animal movement. But the audio remains. You can hear it online if you look deep enough. every 10 seconds. That slow rhythm returns. Metal breath memory. A year later, a historian named Thomas Gibbons reopened the Bureau archives, searching for Elias Ransom's file. It wasn't there, not under R, not under colored settlements, not anywhere. But in a mislabeled folder, St. James Industrial Development, he found something else. A map. Hand-drawn, faded, torn at the edges. Ink browned by time. Across the ridgeline, faint marks of squares and circles. In the margin, a note. Charcoal remains settlement burned. No salvage. Do not resurvey. Below it, a second note written sideways. Bell recovered delivered to county storehouse. Label number 47 iron. The bell. No one ever logged that inventory. The storehouse was demolished in 1912. But county rumor says one of the archivists took it, kept it hidden on his farm, deep in a shed that was never touched again. When Gibbons traced the property, he found the ruins' roof collapsed. Metal scattered dust thick as sleep, and in the corner, half buried in dirt, a shape. It wasn't a bell, not anymore. It had melted, fused into a warped basin, part iron, part glass, like something that had been burned beyond language. And at its base, embedded in the metal, a single carpenter's square. The initials ER were carved into the handle. He took photographs, grainy low-light handheld. When enlarged, you can see faint impressions on the surface. Not letters, not rust. More like fingerprints. Dozens of them, pressed deep into the iron. The metallurgist who examined it said the patterns were impossible. Too uniform, too human. Like a handprint captured in heat that never cooled. They asked if it could be hoax and art piece modern. He shook his head. The oxidation alone, he said, is 100 years old. Maybe more. And still the folklore catches up. Locals began calling it the Iron Prayer. Some say touching it brings calm. Others claim it hums a low tone barely audible that rises at dusk. In 2010, the artifact was moved to the small county museum in Pine Bluff. Visitors report the same thing. The air around it feels heavier, warmer. Some say they hear a faint ringing when they close their eyes. One curator left early after hours, saying she heard a hammer strike inside the walls. 3 times and then quiet. No one ever stayed late again. Meanwhile, the researchers kept studying the ridge. They discovered traces of micro-charcoal embedded deep in the soil particles, consistent with intense, prolonged burning. But the strangest part? The samples also showed traces of phosphorized iron found usually in old church bells. It means one thing: the fire didn't consume the bell. It absorbed it. The metal melted into the earth, fused with the ground itself. The bell became part of the land, and perhaps that's why it still rings. Some say the hammer sound, recorded in 2003, increased after the artifact was moved. 1 year later, hikers reported hearing wooden knocks in threes from different directions all around the clearing. Others felt the ground tremble, as if someone were walking underneath. The county sealed off the area. Ecological preservation, they called it. No more research allowed. But those who grew up nearby still sneak in. They leave coins, small bells, or nails by the trees, offerings for those still building. They whisper, "Keep working, Elias. We still hear you." In 2018, a new line appeared in the digitized Freedmen's Bureau database, a scanned document mislabeled under agricultural reports. It contained half a page of text, most unreadable. But at the bottom, one sentence, clear as breath: the settlement at New Canaan remains. Structure unknown. No casualties confirmed. Activity observed. Activity observed. No signature, no coordinates, no explanation. It was filed in 1880. This is where the story folds in on itself. Fact chasing folklore. Folklore predicting fact. The bell that won't die. The hammer beneath the ground. The map that erases itself. Every layer, real or imagined, hums in the same rhythm. Like history trying to rebuild what it once destroyed. If you stand at the edge of St. James Ridge now, the forest seems to breathe differently. The air tastes metallic, like rain on old nails. When the wind rises, the pines lean together, their tops forming an arch, a cathedral of green and shadow. In the space between trunks, the light falls in patterns, like windows made of dust. And there, just beneath, hearing a low pulse, not menacing, not kind, just steady. You can almost see him. Elias Ransom, moving through the haze, shoulders bent, hammer in hand, face half shadowed. He doesn't speak. He doesn't look up. He just keeps building plank by invisible plank, something you can't quite name. A church, a bridge, a memory. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it's still growing. Every documentary ends where the evidence stops. But here the evidence moves. It hums, shifts, hides beneath new roots. It refuses to stay still long enough to be archived. Maybe that's the point. Maybe New Canaan isn't a story of loss, but of endurance disguised as silence. Elias Ransom didn't vanish. He became the work. He built a structure that outlived fire time, even the forgetting. And that structure is sound. When the wind blows, the forest sings his name. When rain falls, the ground beats like a drum. When no one's around, something still hammers slow and patient. Fact folklore. It no longer matters. The line between them blurred, glowing alive. Because sometimes, the truest record isn't written in ink. It's carved in silence. And beneath these pines, silence is never empty. Morning comes slow over St. James Ridge. The pines lean east, as if bowing to light. Mist clings low, folding around the roots like smoke that never left. And the sound, faint patient, begins again. One strike, two, three. Pause. Then nothing. The same rhythm, the one every witness, every record, every whisper remembers. The hammer, still working, but there is no hand, no house, no man. Only trees taller than they've ever been, their bark dark with age and memory. It's been nearly a century and a half since New Canaan burned. The world around it has changed beyond recognition. Trains came, then highways, then silence again. Factories rose and fell. Names shifted, borders blurred. But the ridge, it stayed. No one built over it. No one farmed it. It simply waited, untouched, unclaimed, as if the land itself remembered who it once belonged to. Old maps still show a faint outline, a square that doesn't match the terrain. Surveyors call it a cartographic ghost. Locals call it Elias's footprint. They say, after storms, and when lightning cracks across the valley, the ridge lights up first, a pale shimmer through the trees, like iron, remembering fire. In 2020, a researcher returned to record ambient sound for a documentary. A young man named Marcus Hale, descendant of freedmen from Pine Bluff. He didn't come looking for ghosts. He came for roots. He set microphones along the ridge at dawn wind, low sky gray air thick with dew. And when he played the tapes back that night, he heard it. Not the hammer this time. Something else. Voices. Faint. Layered. Humming in harmony, almost like a congregation lost inside distance. A hymn with no words, rising and falling with the rhythm of breath. When slowed, it formed a phrase fractured but clear. Still, building. He didn't publish the tape. He said some things weren't meant to be uploaded. They were meant to be remembered. He plays it once a year. June 4th, the same date as the first Freedmen's Bureau entry that named New Canaan. He sits by the creek, headphones on, eyes closed. And when the wind moves, he says, it feels like someone's sitting beside him, quiet, listening too. There are few physical traces left now. A hinge rusted into stone, charcoal under roots. Bits of glass warped, bubbled, the kind made when fire meets faith. But memory doesn't need artifacts. It needs breath, someone willing to speak the names again. And the names do survive. Scrawled in the corners of Bible pages, whispered in Sunday sermons, carved into the underside of pews by hands that never stopped believing, each one a small defiance against forgetting. In 2021, a team of archaeologists tried to scan the ridge using ground-penetrating radar. They found irregular shapes too ordered to be natural, rectangles beneath the soil, outlines of foundations. They marked them on their screen, labeled possible structures. But as they prepared to dig, the equipment failed. Static filled the monitors, all frequencies jammed by a low pulse, 5 beats, pause, repeat, the same rhythm. The team withdrew. They filed no report. But one of them, a graduate student, later admitted she kept hearing the sound in her dreams. She said, "It's not noise, it's work. It's someone finishing something." Fact fades. Folklore endures. And between the two, the forest hums. Some say the pines grew from the ashes of the cabins, each root a body, each trunk a name. They say the trees are taller because they're reaching for what they built. That's why the wind through them sounds like singing. Others believe the forest is haunted, that on still nights you can see silhouettes moving among the trunks, heads bowed, shoulders bent, carrying unseen weight. Not wandering, just working. But the descendants, they don't call it haunting. They call it continuation. Every June they gather near the ridge. They bring hammers, small ones, old ones, rusted smooth from use. They strike 3 times into the air, then bow their heads. Children listen for the echo. Some hear it, some don't. But all feel it, that shiver in the chest, that moment when the heart and the air move together. They recite the only line that survived from Reverend Harlan's letter. "Lord, keep their names in light." And when they leave, they whisper into the forest, "We still hear you." Because maybe that's enough. To listen, to answer. Some nights the sound carries farther beyond the ridge, across the highway, over the rooftops of towns that forgot who they were built upon. Truck drivers on Route 17 report a faint ringing in their cabins just before dawn. They check the radio silence, check the tires fine. And then they see it, light rising in the trees, low and golden, like fire that doesn't burn. They don't stop. They just drive slower, watching. The forest glows for a few seconds, then fades. Nothing left but pine silhouettes and fog. But the smell, sap, and smoke lingers. In church basements and history rooms, students study maps that don't exist anymore, looking for proof that the town was real. They find fragments, margins, initials. And every time the data fails to explain the story, someone smiles and says, "That's how you know it's true." Because erasure leaves a shape. Silence leaves a sound. And every loss hums its own return. If you come here now to St. James Ridge at dusk, you won't find markers or signs. You'll just find air that listens, light that waits. And maybe if you stand still enough, long enough, you'll hear it too. That slow, steady rhythm beneath your feet. A heartbeat made of iron and time. The sound of hands that never stopped working. 5 beats, pause, repeat. The language of memory, the grammar of faith. Elias Ransom, the builder who vanished into smoke, never had a grave. But he doesn't need one. Every nail driven, every hymn sung, every echo in these trees is his marker. He built something stronger than walls. He built a sound that refuses to die. And through that sound, his people live always mid-song, always mid-strike. Maybe that's what freedom really became here. Not an escape, but a resonance. A hum in the bones of the earth saying, "We're still here." History calls New Canaan a lost settlement. But maybe it was never lost. Maybe it transformed from timber and clay to spirit and vibration, from structure to echo, from fact to remembrance. And maybe that's how a town survives erasure, by refusing to be quiet. So tonight, if you hear that sound, that faint bell beneath the rain, that slow rhythm in the dark, don't be afraid. It's not haunting you. It's inviting you to remember, to build, to keep the work going, because every echo needs a listener. Every name needs a witness. And every story that was buried beneath the pines still breathes. You've just heard the record of a place history tried to erase, but it still lives in soil, in sound, in us. Subscribe, keep their voices alive, and listen closely. The work never stopped.